Welcome to Propeller Breeze, the show for student pilots, sim fans, and everyone chasing that first solo and beyond. All information in this podcast is for entertainment and general knowledge only. Always verify with certified flight instructors or regulatory authorities before attempting anything mentioned here.
So, you're probably picturing your first solo flight right now?
Oh, absolutely. Everyone does.
Right. But the reality is the decision that dictates whether you ever actually get off the ground and honestly whether you go bankrupt doing it well, that happens months before you ever smell aviation fuel.
Yeah, long before.
Exactly. So today on our deep dive, we are talking directly to you, the aspiring student pilot. You're gearing up for your private pilot license, your PPL, right?
Exciting times.
It is. But it's also, super overwhelming. So we are diving into the official guide, navigating the path to flight training certification, to really decode this complex process of selecting a flight school and an instructor.
Which is huge.
We basically want to bypass the glossy marketing brochures and give you the actual mechanics of how to protect your investment.
And, that framing is just so crucial because the aviation industry, well, it relies really heavily on this illusion of standardization.
What do you mean by that?
Well, a student walks onto a tarmac, right? And they see a row of identical Cessna 172s. And they just naturally assume that the training inside those planes is universally the exact same everywhere.
Which makes sense, logically.
It does. But aviation at its core is all about risk management. It's about judgment. So the very first command decision you make as a pilot is choosing the regulatory and physical environment where you're going to learn.
So it's basically setting the tone for everything.
Exactly. That decision acts as the foundation for your entire flying career. And I mean, if you have a cracked foundation, that just means unstable airmanship later on.
Wow. Okay. Let's jump straight into that invisible rule book then, the one governing everything you do. Because before we even talk about airplane models or glass cockpits or whatever, we have to talk about the FAA regulations.
Yes, we do.
The guide leans heavily into this absolute alphabet soup of 14 CFR. What is that?
Right. So CFR is the Code of Federal Regulations, specifically Title 14.
Okay.
It's this massive, massive set of rules that governs literally all space and aviation activities in the U.S.
Like everything.
Everything. And under that huge umbrella, your flight training is going to fall under one of three specific parts. So that's Part 142, Part 141, or Part 61.
Okay. That's a lot of numbers.
It is, yeah. Let's actually clear Part 142 off the deck immediately.
Sounds good.
Those are training centers, often called flight academies. They primarily operate under contract to the airlines.
Oh, so like the big leagues.
Right. They use these multi-million-dollar full-motion simulators to train people on transport or turbine aircraft.
Okay, so probably not for the beginner.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, a few might offer PPL training, but as an independent student pilot, your decision is almost certainly going to come down to Part 141 versus Part 61.
Okay. So we basically have a fork in the road right at the very beginning. Let's look at the highly structured path first, Part 141.
Yeah, so Part 141 schools, they voluntarily subject themselves to incredibly stringent direct FAA oversight.
Voluntarily.
Yeah, they choose to do it. The FAA audits their personnel. They inspect their maintenance practices, evaluate their facilities on a really regular schedule. But the real defining feature of a Part 141 school is the TCO. That's the training course outline.
Right. The text mentions the TCO, but I want to make sure we actually understand the mechanism here. Because, it's not just a syllabus handed out on the first day of class, is it?
Oh, no, far from it. An FAA-approved TCO dictates the exact sequence and conditions of your training.
Like down to the minute.
Almost, yeah. It isn't just a list that says, hey, learn steep turns today. A TCO specifies that on, say, flight number 7, you will introduce steep turns.
Okay.
And the weather minimums must be at least a 3,000-foot ceiling. The flight has to last exactly 1.5 hours.
Wow, really?
Yeah, and you must perform the maneuver within very specific altitude tolerances before you are legally allowed to even progress to flight number 8.
That is intense.
The school literally cannot deviate from this structure without getting prior FAA approval.
So Part 141 is basically like enrolling in a super formal university degree program with a really strict syllabus.
That's a great way to put it.
And that level of rigidity guarantees you aren't skipping vital steps, which sounds incredibly safe. But obviously, not every school can operate like that, which I'm guessing brings us to Part 61.
Exactly. A lot of phenomenal flight schools find the administrative burden of Part 141 to be just totally impractical for their business model.
Yeah, all that paperwork.
Right. So they operate under Part 61 instead. And this also covers independent flight instructors, like the ones operating out of local flying clubs.
Okay, so it's more like hiring a private tutor who tailors the lessons to you.
Yeah, that's the vibe. They still train you to the exact same FAA practical test standards, though. You still have to pass the exact same check ride.
Good to know.
But Part 61 does not stipulate the how. It provides the statutory minimums, sure, but it leaves the day-to-day organization entirely up to the instructor.
Wait, okay, hold on. Because I'm looking at the legal minimums between the two right now, and this honestly seems like an obvious financial hack.
Oh, I know where you're going with this.
Yeah, because Part 141 requires a minimum of 35 flight hours for a PPL, right?
Correct.
But Part 61 requires 40 hours. At hundreds of dollars an hour for airplane rental and instructor time, shouldn't every single student rush to a 121 school just to save that 5 hours of cash?
It sounds totally logical, right? But the data tells a completely different and, frankly, much more expensive story.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that 5-hour difference. It's just a paper reality. It is not a tarmac reality.
Meaning what, exactly?
Well, the national average for a student pilot to actually achieve their PPL is somewhere between 60 and 75 hours of flight training.
Wait, what? 60 to 75 hours? That is a massive discrepancy from 35.
It's nearly double.
Why is the average so much higher than the legal minimum?
It's a combination of things. Airspace complexity is a big one, weather delays, and honestly, the fact that most people are doing their training part-time, while balancing a job or school.
Yeah, that makes sense. Life gets in the way.
Exactly. Plus, those legal minimums were established decades ago. Airspace was simpler then, and aircraft were way less complex. Today, almost nobody is check ride ready at 35 or 40 hours.
Wow, okay.
So making a major financial decision based purely on that 5-hour regulatory gap, it's a total trap. You're going to blow right past 40 hours regardless of which path you choose.
Okay, so let's put some hard numbers to this trap just to make it real, because Part 61 relies so heavily on the individual instructor's organizational skills, right?
Very much so.
So if you hire a, say, disorganized Part 61 instructor just because their hourly rate is $10 cheaper, that flexibility actually works against you.
Oh, 100%.
Like if they don't have a structured lesson plan and you spend the first 20 minutes of every single flight just reviewing what you did last week, you aren't progressing.
No, you're just spinning your wheels.
Right. And if you end up flying 75 hours instead of 50 because you just keep repeating lessons, well, you haven't saved money. You've wasted, what, like $5,000 or $6,000?
At least.
Yeah.
And that is the hidden cost of flexibility. The source material is completely adamant about this.
Yeah.
If you choose the Part 61 route, you have to demand to see your instructor's documented training syllabus before you start.
Like before you even write a check.
Exactly. You need tangible proof that they have a structured roadmap for your progression. Otherwise, you're just burning avgas and writing checks into a void.
Okay, so because Part 61 allows for so much of this flexibility, the burden of quality control really falls entirely on you, the student.
It really does.
You can't just trust a glossy brochure or a slick website. You have to know how to actually look under the hood of these flight schools before you hand over your deposit.
Absolutely.
So, practically speaking, where does that vetting process actually begin?
Well, it begins before you even leave your house. You want to start by contacting the local FSDO.
FSDO.
Yeah, that stands for Flight Standards District Office. Think of them as basically the local administrative and enforcement branch of the FAA.
Okay.
They maintain files on all the schools operating within their district. So you want to check the FAA Pilot School Search database online, definitely.
Right.
But you also want to know if a school has a history of enforcement actions or an unusually high failure rate for their students.
That makes a lot of sense. So once you've done that homework and filtered out the schools with those major red flags, you have to sort of match a school's operational reality to your own life.
Yes.
Because the text stresses that training should be as regular and frequent as possible. And I mean, we're talking about muscle memory and procedural recall here, right?
Exactly.
You can't just fly once a month and expect to progress. So if your school doesn't have the capacity to fly you 2 or 3 times a week, you'll just spend half your lesson relearning what your hands forgot from last month.
That's spot on. The human brain literally requires recency to build the neural pathways necessary for these complex motor skills. I mean, flaring an airplane on landing isn't something you just read about and do.
Right, you have to feel it.
You do. So when you tour a flight school, your first priority is not inspecting the paint job on the planes.
Even though a nice paint job is pretty cool.
It's nice, but your priority is interrogating their maintenance and their scheduling reality.
Yeah.
You need to ask management directly about their dispatch reliability rate.
Okay, but you can't just take management's word for it, right?
Right.
The text warns not to base decisions just on that.
Right.
You have to find the current students hanging around the pilot lounge and ask them the uncomfortable questions.
Yes, the students know the truth.
Like, hey, when you book a plane for a Tuesday morning cross country, is that plane actually fueled, mechanically sound, and ready to go? Or are you constantly getting texts that your flight is canceled due to maintenance?
Exactly. Because the absolute cheapest hourly rental rate in the state means nothing if the fleet is constantly grounded.
Yeah, cheap but broken isn't a good deal.
Not at all. And you also need to look at the physical infrastructure of the facility itself. Like, do they have dedicated, quiet spaces for the required FAA ground training?
Ah, yes.
And that actually leads us to one of the most critical, yet somehow overlooked details in the official guidelines regarding the physical layout of the school.
Oh, this detail absolutely fascinated me because the text specifically warns you to check if the school has private areas for pre-flight briefings and post-flight debriefings.
Yeah, a lot of people gloss right over that.
I know I did it first. I initially thought, I mean, we're talking about practicing stalls and steep turns here. We aren't conducting a medical exam. Why the need for a secret private room?
It really comes down to the neuroscience of learning under stress. Flight training requires an incredibly high cognitive load.
You're doing a lot at once.
You're managing a 3D environment, you're talking to air traffic control, monitoring engine instruments, and physically manipulating the aircraft.
It's a lot to juggle.
And you are going to make mistakes. It's inevitable.
Right.
You might bounce a landing hard or just completely botch a radio call in really busy airspace. And when that happens, your heart rate spikes, adrenaline floods your system, and you enter this mild state of fight or flight.
Oh, wow. So when you finally get back on the ground, your ego is already pretty bruised, and your brain is essentially on the defensive.
That is exactly the problem. So imagine if your instructor tries to debrief that botched landing out in a crowded hallway, or a busy pilot lounge with a bunch of experienced pilots drinking coffee nearby.
That sounds like a nightmare.
Human nature just kicks in. The student feels exposed and totally embarrassed. So instead of absorbing the really critical feedback about, say, their airspeed control on final approach, all of their mental energy goes into just surviving the social embarrassment.
So the lesson is just completely lost.
Completely lost.
Wow. Okay, so a private briefing room removes the audience. It creates this sterile, non-threatening environment where the instructor can say, hey, here's exactly where the maneuver fell apart.
Yes.
And then the student can actually process the mechanics of that failure without feeling judged by the entire airport. It's basically about creating a safe space for vulnerability, which I guess is the only way to master a complex skill.
You nailed it. The physical environment directly facilitates the psychological environment. If a school doesn't prioritize private briefing spaces, they honestly just don't understand the psychology of their students.
That is such a huge insight. Okay, so let's assume you found the unicorn school, right?
The dream school.
Yeah. The planes are perfectly maintained, the FSDO record is totally clean, they have beautiful private briefing rooms, and the schedule matches yours perfectly.
Okay.
The stark reality the text presents here is that absolutely none of those operational details matter if the person sitting in the right seat next to you is the wrong fit.
Yep, it all falls apart.
The ultimate make or break factor is your Certificated Flight Instructor, the CFI.
The CFI really is the absolute linchpin of the whole aviation training system. The official guidelines place total responsibility on the flight instructor to train you to FAA standards.
Total responsibility.
Yes. And the testing process to even earn that CFI certificate reflects that heavy burden because, when an instructor takes their CFI check ride, the FAA examiner already knows they can physically fly a plane.
Right. They wouldn't be there otherwise.
Exactly. The entire exam is actually a grueling test of the learning process itself. They were tested on pedagogical theory, the fundamentals of teaching, and their ability to recognize and correct student errors in real time.
That is fascinating. The text also highlights that the FAA heavily endorses a scenario-based training program. Now, for someone who has only ever experienced traditional classroom learning, the idea of scenario-based training honestly sounds a bit like corporate jargon.
It does sound like an HR seminar.
Yeah. So how does that mechanism actually work in practice at like 2,000 feet?
So traditional training used to be highly maneuver-focused. The instructor would say, memorize this engine failure checklist.
Okay.
And the student just rote memorize the steps, A, B, C, D. But scenario-based training forces the student to apply that knowledge in a dynamic, changing environment.
Give me an example of that.
Sure. So instead of just asking you to recite a checklist while cruising along perfectly, A scenario-based CFI might wait until you're flying over a dense forest.
Oh, boy.
And then they'll unexpectedly pull the throttle back to idle and say, okay, you just lost your engine. Where are we landing right now?
Oh, wow. That immediately changes the stakes. You aren't just reciting steps anymore. You have to evaluate wind direction, look for a clearing, monitor your glide speed, and run the restart checklist all simultaneously.
Right. It forces the student to manage all the messy variables of real-world flying.
Makes total sense.
Another scenario might be, well, say the instructor introduces a simulated radio failure while you're approaching a really busy airport. Or they give you a diversion scenario because of simulated pop-up thunderstorms.
So they're constantly throwing curveballs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The instructor basically shifts from being a teacher to being an advisor and a guide. They're teaching you how to think, how to prioritize, and how to make command decisions when the environment degrades.
I really love the analogy that an ideal CFI acts like a co-pilot, a project manager, and a coach all rolled into one.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
Their job is to guide you toward becoming a confident planner on the ground and an in-flight manager in the air.
Yes.
And ultimately, their most important job is to essentially train themselves out of a job, right? By turning you into a critical evaluator of your own performance.
That is the ultimate goal, for the student to be able to self-diagnose. I mean, if a landing is flat, a well-trained student doesn't need the CFI to tell them what went wrong.
They already know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They know they carried too much airspeed over the threshold, but getting to that level of proficiency, it requires an incredibly strong working relationship between the student and the instructor.
Which brings us to perhaps the most empowering takeaway in this entire document. Because, let's be real, the power dynamics in flight training can feel very, very intimidating.
Oh, massively.
You're the total novice, and they have the stripes and the thousands of hours of experience, so a lot of students feel trapped. They think, you know, if I'm not grasping crosswind landings, it must be my fault. I'm just a bad student.
Yeah, that happens a lot. But the official guide actively dispels that myth.
How so?
It explicitly states that the relationship is a professional one. If the CFI is not training in a manner conducive to your specific learning style, I mean, whether you're a visual learner who needs diagrams drawn out or a tactile learner who just needs to feel the flight controls, you have a fundamental problem.
Right.
If your schedules consistently conflict, or honestly, if their communication style just makes you anxious in the cockpit, the text tells you exactly what to do.
Which is?
Find another CFI.
Period. You are the consumer. You are spending tens of thousands of dollars for a service. So firing a CFI or going to the chief pilot to ask them to switch your instructor, that isn't a personal attack.
Not at all.
And it's not a failure on your part either. It is a necessary business decision to protect your educational investment and your future safety. It's crucial.
If you let a bad instructional relationship fester just because you're avoiding an awkward conversation, you are severely compromising your foundational skills.
Absolutely. The habits, the risk management strategies, the judgment calls you learn from your first instructor, those will stick with you for thousands of flight hours.
You literally cannot afford to compromise on the person transferring those skills to you.
No, you can't.
So, kind of synthesizing all these sources we've looked at today, the path to the cockpit requires you to be fiercely proactive while you are still on the ground.
Yes.
You have to navigate the regulatory alphabet soup, recognizing that a Part 141 TCO provides rigid safety through structure, while Part 61 requires you to demand a documented syllabus so you don't fall into a $5,000 trap of repeated lessons.
Right.
You have to ignore the myth of the 75-hour minimum and actually budget for the 60 to 75-hour reality.
Very important. And when you vet a school, you don't just look at their hourly rates. You interrogate their maintenance logs, you ask the current students about dispatch reliability, and you ensure they have private briefing rooms to protect your cognitive processing when you make mistakes.
Yep.
But above all of that, you hold the power to hire and fire the CFI who will ultimately shape your airmanship.
You do. And, you know, the official sources emphasize over and over that your instructor is training you to operate in an ever-changing environment. But more importantly, they are training you to become the primary evaluator of your own actions.
Right.
So I want to leave you with this thought to consider.
Okay, let's hear it.
When you are finally up there in the cockpit by yourself, thousands of feet above the earth on your very first solo flight, and there is no CFI sitting in the right seat to diagnose your learning difficulties or critique your landing in a private briefing room, what mental checklist will you use to evaluate yourself?
Wow. That is the ultimate test of a pilot, isn't it? The mindset you build before you ever even touch the controls.
It truly is.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We wish you clear skies, solid decision-making, and an incredible start to your flight training journey.
That's it for this episode. Keep your wings level, your brain sharp, and catch you next time in the pattern. Thanks for riding with Propeller Breeze.